Chrysta Bairre is a career coach, speaker, author, and founder of Live, Love, Work. Chrysta works with successful mid-career professionals and service-based entrepreneurs who want more from life and career. Chrysta's clients increase their professional impact and income so they work smarter and make more money and find happiness in and out of their office. Chrysta has spoken at Ignite Denver and Ignite Fort Collins, presented at Boulder Startup Week, Fort Collins Startup Week, Colorado State University, East Colorado SBDC, Aurora Chamber of Commerce, and more than 50 other events. She knows her stuff. Chrysta is also the founder of She Leads, which is a free women's leadership group for professional women in northern Colorado. She is a 2016 and 2017 participant and facilitator of Larimer County Women of the Year program. Her upcoming book, Prozac and Poverty, tells her story growing up in poverty in the Denver area, offering life-changing, actionable steps for readers to improve their circumstances beyond trauma, privilege, and other systems of oppression. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chrysta Bairre.
So as you can see, I don't have a PowerPoint or any handouts because I really like to be present to who's in the room and what you're dealing with today. And to help me out with that, what I'd love to hear from you is why you showed up today. What did you want to get out of this topic? When you saw that this was the topic and you thought, hey, I want to sign up for that, what about it interested you, or what did you really want to learn? Because I'm going to tailor this presentation to you. So this is your opportunity to ask for what you want, which is something that I work on with my clients all the time, knowing what you want and asking for it. That's how you get it.
I was intrigued by the title, Power Without Privilege, in that for me, I realized at 12 years old that society was going to decide on where I was going to fit in based upon my family. Between the, and at 12 years or any child of any age, you really don't have any control of the decisions that your parents make. And if you weren't lucky enough to be born into a privileged family, that was just not going to happen for you. And I think I kind of created an alter ego and tried to fit into that society. And it wasn't until I was like 25 years old when I realized, man, I don't even know who I truly am anymore. And I think I'm a great person, regardless of what anybody else thinks of me or my growing up, or I was on food stamps. That wasn't my fault, it was my parents' fault. So just kind of really have always, the moment that I realized that, the moment I stepped out, it's been a huge battle, but something that I strive for every day. So that was really my purpose, was that I saw that and went, whether that's what it means or not, but that's what I got out of it. Not to mention I always get great things out of these Now Center events.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. We'll definitely be talking along those lines. Yeah.
So I recently started my own consulting business around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I find that I'm often in groups of people that look just like me. So particularly white women who have quite a bit of privilege. And so I came here because I wanted to immerse myself in a group of people who might identify with something different and really get to be a witness to what those experiences are so that I can be more authentic in the business that I'm running.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I am a white male, and I came here to see how to utilize my privilege in a way that is respectful and good for everyone, just overall, and in a just manner. So.
Awesome. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else?
I'm curious about how you're going to define and talk about power and privilege from the perspective of being a white woman. And we're friends, so I know some of your stories, so I'm curious to see what you share here and to be in a space where people are talking about privilege and they're usually white people.
Yeah.
So.
Elephant in the room, I'm white, we're all this is a pretty white crowd. Yeah.
I am interested in kind of a combination of all of those and how to handle having some privileges and not others, and how to handle that balance and not be resentful of the ones that I don't have and still benefit or help others with the privilege that I do have.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a little bit different
note than everybody else. I'm actually here specifically because of you. Just your little bio is like really fascinating to me, and as someone who's doing a talk, I hope to learn a lot just from your kind of the way you run this event. So I'm interested to learn about you.
Thank you. You'll hear about me. Okay. Anyone else want to chime in? This is not your last opportunity because I want this to be super interactive, and as we're going through, if you have a question, feel free to, indicate to me, raise your hand, whatever, that you have a question, and we'll stop and have dialogue throughout. I'm not the type of presenter that is going to stand at the front of the room and talk at you. So, whew. Right? I was sitting in a room similar to this, listening to a speaker at the front of the room, when I had a feeling that I'd had many times before. That feeling of frustration and self-doubt, feeling like somehow I didn't belong in that room, feeling like somehow I wasn't good enough. I was listening to a speaker talk about having won this World Champion Public Speaking Award. And he was presenting this topic from the perspective of, if I did it, anyone can do it. How many times have you sat in a room or read a book and you listened to someone say, if I did it, anyone can do it? And this didn't leave me feeling motivated. It left me feeling really frustrated. Because I didn't have the same opportunities that this presenter had. I grew up here in the Denver area. Most of my childhood, I lived in poverty. There was pretty severe mental illness in my family, and things were not stable. They were not safe. We weren't just poor, we were below the poverty line. We received public assistance and all of the fun social things that come with that. I got made fun of at school. Even the people who came to help to bring us baskets of food or clothes in the winter, whatever that looked like, would look down on us. And I learned to be ashamed of where I came from. But I wasn't going to stay in that situation. I knew that I wasn't, and I made a decision when I was 8 years old that I was going to create something better for myself, better than the life that I had just because of the family I was born into. And from that moment, I started seeking out any kind of opportunity to better my situation, to better myself. And it wasn't easy, and it took a really long time. The fact that I'm standing in front of you right now, sharing this information with you, speaks to the fact that right now I am privileged, or I wouldn't be able to be here. If I didn't have a safe, reliable home to go home to every night and a place to take a shower and good clothes to wear, people wouldn't allow me to stand in front of the room and talk to you. So it's a really interesting, situation to be in, to be up here talking with you about this, but knowing that I came from something different, and knowing that my experience is different than other people's experience. There might be people in the room who had a similar experience to me, and yet there were still parts of it were different. And knowing that there's other people out there that when you add in being a person of color, for example, it's even harder, right? So that feeling that I had in that room with that speaker one day, it made a lot more sense to me when I came across this 2017 study that was done on underprivileged students. And what they found was that when these underprivileged students were told, life is fair, and you have the same opportunities as your peers, these students internalized that, and they assumed that if they were not able to achieve the same things that their peers were able to achieve, something was wrong with them. That's how they took that information. Something is wrong with me. They saw decreased confidence and an increase in risky behaviors. And a lot of these students who were told life is fair, when they had very real barriers in the way, they just stopped trying to succeed. And when I read this study, it was so fascinating, and that's when I knew that as the person who has sat in those rooms and felt frustrated with the person at the front of the room speaking from a place of privilege, that feeling of, I blamed myself. I always thought there was something wrong with me. I didn't assume that it was the system, that it was the system of oppression. I didn't assume that it was my circumstances. I thought it was me. And that's the reason I feel that this topic is so important to talk about and talk openly about. So going back to that speaker I was listening to, he was telling us that the way that we could all do what he did, how he had won this prestigious public speaking award, was by taking a year off of work and speaking as many times as he could a week, up to 5 times a week at various Toastmasters groups, so that he could hone his skill and go on to win this award. You can all do that, right? You have the resources and the support to take a year off of work? What? You don't? And the interesting thing to me is someone sitting in the room feeling frustrated by this message is most of the people around me were actually motivated or inspired. And I don't, maybe that's because they came from a different background than me. It's possible. But maybe it's also because some of us, like those kids, when we hear messages like that, we internalize it and we think, if I can't do that, then there's something wrong with me. I just don't care enough. I'm not trying hard enough. I'm not good enough. We're not always aware that the reason we're not achieving those same results is because the odds are stacked against us. And that looks like a lot of different things. It's not just race, right? It's class, it's gender identity, it's a whole slew of things. And I started to notice as I sat in more and more rooms as I was building my business and putting myself out there and reading books. Anyone else is like a personal development book junkie? Yeah. And realizing that so much of the information that's shared about how to improve your situation and better your life is shared from a perspective of privilege. Because the person sharing that information would not have that platform if they were not privileged. Do you agree with that? I mean, there may be a few exceptions here and there, but for the most part, that's what we're talking about. And I thought, how frustrating is that? And I really wanted to be in this world where we stopped looking at people as experts and we started looking for people who are information leaders, who can separate their privilege from the information and the ideas and knowledge that they have to share, so that they can reach a wider audience. Because the way it is now, when you're hearing all of these speakers at the front of the room and they're telling you, here's how you make your life better, here's how you make your business better, and their perspective is only privilege, unless your background is fairly similar to theirs, you're going to struggle to implement what you're hearing. And you're excluding a large portion of your audience. And the people who probably need the help most are the people who have to work the hardest to even take any semblance of what you're talking about and apply it to themselves. And so I want to talk about some ways that we can shift that dynamic, and you as an individual can show up differently in the world. You can show up differently as someone who's aware and has this consciousness around this issue. And that when you seek to help others, when you seek to make lives better, that you're actually having a greater impact than you would otherwise. Because do you only want to make the lives better of other people who are privileged? I mean, certainly they deserve some amount of help, but what if you could reach a much wider audience and change the situation for many, many more people? Is that what you want? I know it's definitely what I want. And I've had many conversations about this topic. Even women speakers, white women can still be privileged, but women are a little bit lower class than men, right? Like we have barriers that men don't have. And I've even seen this with women presenters. I went to a women's conference last year and I saw this women presenter talking about her background, how she graduated from an Ivy League school, and her first job out of college she got at GE, and how she got her current job as the president of a software company when she was vacationing at a resort in New Zealand. And she was telling us that what she had done to get this job was she had met the founder of the organization and started up a conversation with him. And so she was saying, if I did it, you can do it too. Just vacation at a resort in New Zealand with your Ivy League education, it's really not a big deal. And so I have some friends that I would just rant about this topic to. And I'd be like, this makes me so crazy. And I think they always listened and nodded and And eventually I decided I needed to write a book about it. But the book is not necessarily about this topic as a whole. It's a book written directly for people who have overcome some kind of challenge, some lack of privilege, some trauma, something like that, and how they can interact differently with the information that they're hearing and improve their situation. Because I want to hear from more and more people who are speaking from that perspective, who are acknowledging that privilege is an issue and that it matters, and then saying, now what can you do? And I have a sign-up sheet here, very exciting stuff. And if you want to put your name and email address down, I will send you a digital copy of my book when it's done with the editing process. I'm in the middle of editing right now. So I'll pass this around while we're still talking, and you can sign up if you'd like me to send you a digital copy of that. Because my goal with this book is to really share this message far and wide. And I acknowledge that some of the people who are going to read my book have done something similar to me. They've come from a lack of privilege and they've improved their situation. But I want my book to get out there to as many people as possible, including those people that are still in that situation. They haven't improved their situation yet because they don't know how. Because all the access to the resources and tools that are out there are given from the front of the room by someone who has so much privilege, right? So let's talk about how you can shift that and what you can do differently if you want to show up differently in the world. And the first thing that I want to talk about is meeting people that are different than you. Like you said, most of us, tons and tons of studies will show that we're most comfortable with people who are like us. And this is a huge mistake that employers make, is hiring only people that are like them. Whereas all of these studies show that when you have more diversity in your organization, it's actually a stronger organization. But we're going to be the most comfortable with people who are like us. And what I encourage you to do is educate yourself and engage people who are different from you in conversations so that you can find out what it's actually like for them. And so that you realize when you're sharing knowledge and information that you have some perspectives other than your own to consider. Right? And so I'd love to take just a few minutes and do a little activity, like grouping up with whoever's near you and brainstorming who is it that you want to connect with that's different than you, and where are you going to find them? Is everyone up for that? Yes, thank you. So let's get together in partners, in pairs, and if we have a three group, that's fine too. But who is it that you want to connect with that's different from you, and where are you going to find them?
Did you come up with some good ideas? Did anyone come up with an idea that you want to share? How brave are you feeling?
We didn't get that far. We just talked about people and then we just we didn't solve any world problems. So.
But you have like an intention for people that you want to reach out to at the very least.
I threw out one thing I'm looking for, like when I'm job hunting, is like I want to know about diversity, and I was saying that like sometimes it's pretty evident, you go to a company website and they list employees and you get a good sense of like good cross-section of the community. But if they don't have that, like, what's the polite way to be like, hey, how's the diversity in your business before I come in for an interview or something like that? That's an important thing for me. I don't know an easy answer to that. And maybe it's not really polite or.
Yeah, I think before you go in for the interview, it's a little bit harder to gauge, and I do actually think that's the kind of question that you can ask in an interview, if that's something that's important to you. And especially if you're meeting with someone from HR, then they should be able to have some idea and give you that information. But one way that you could potentially check is on LinkedIn, if you look at a company, an organization, and you can see the people working for them, you might be able to gauge from there. I mean, not everyone's going to be on LinkedIn and have it linked to their current employer, but a lot of people do. So that could be a way that you could get at least some sense of it, but then go ahead and accept the interview and ask those types of culture and value questions in the interview. That's something that I coach with my career clients who are looking for other professional jobs. It's like really, really important to have those culture and value questions that you're asking them in the interview, because that's part of what ensures that you have a good fit, instead of doing that changing around jobs every couple of years.
Yeah.
Can I just add to
Yeah,
that?
please.
So just something to be aware of, not that you don't already know this, but if it is a big company, a lot of times they'll outsource some of that labor. So if you're looking and you see people that aren't like you, they also might be able to look at the location to see if they're listed at headquarters or if they're listed abroad or if they're local. Because every branch can be different too. They might have a branch in Atlanta and they might have a branch here, and you might be seeing cross-contamination of both branches when you look on LinkedIn. So if you could filter by location, that might be helpful too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah.
Find out information about people that are different than you, maybe meet them, or at least find out about their experiences, the internet. Because everyone's on there. And if you go out and you look for blogs, or you follow people on Twitter, or you read articles from other perspectives, you might get some real insights into what the situation can be like for other people. And I heard the suggestion once that those articles that you tend to ignore on Facebook because you're just like, that's not for me, like start reading some of those. Because you probably ignore them because it's a viewpoint that's different than your own. And what if you just decided to be open to learning what someone else's viewpoint is and like clicked on one of them just to see what it says? And like, what can I learn about this person from reading this? But yeah, there's a lot of great blogs and books that are out there that you could read that will give you some of this perspective from a variety of experiences. So it is out there. And then the volunteering is the one I love too, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even just looking into local event calendars that are not yours or your neighborhoods. For example, the Mercury Cafe does a beautiful job of a Sunday night poetry reading, and there are people from across the board that perform. And they really do a good job of just pinpointing their experiences and allowing everybody to interpret it as their own. And then there's meet and greets and mingles at the end, et cetera, et cetera. So check out the events, check out something that you might not feel comfortable going to, and respect the space enough to be a part of it.
Yeah, awesome suggestion, thank you.
So I identify as bisexual, and that's something that it's often overlooked within the GLBTQ spectrum, GLBTQ plus spectrum. And people just looking at me, particularly because I'm currently married to a male, will just assume that means that I'm straight. However, when I'm in a different type of relationship, people assume that means that I'm lesbian or whatever. And so yeah, you cannot tell by looking at someone, and there's something to be said for what are all of those different variations of how we self-identify and who we are and how that has an impact. And I relate to what you were saying about your partner, because I know, certainly being bi isn't one of the worst ways that I might be less acknowledged, but it is one of the ways where I'm not quite accepted in the straight community, but not always quite accepted in the gay community too. It's like a really interesting line to walk. So yeah, thank you for that. So moving on, I want to talk a little bit about, now that you have identified where you might meet some people that are different than you, I want to talk about when you're sharing your knowledge and information, making it relatable to a greater audience. And it shouldn't necessarily be the audience's responsibility to relate the information to themselves. Do you agree with that? I mean, unless you want to, that's how you choose to go about, and you're like, I don't care about reaching people who aren't like me, but you probably wouldn't be here in this room today if that were true, right? And so, take that little extra step to make sure that it's something that they can relate to and that they know what they can do. So there's a couple ways you can do that. Like, you might give them some examples. If you're sharing information, you might say, and here's 3 ways that you can use this. And making sure that those 3 ways are accessible to the audience that you want to reach. At least one of them is accessible to, right, a wider audience. Or even this exercise like we did today, because I put you in the position of thinking about it and talking with other people and determining how this applies to you. Rather than just standing in front of the room and telling you what you need to do and then sending you off on your own, and like maybe there's some people in the room that are like, I wouldn't really know how to go about that. But we're using the group knowledge and group consciousness to help each other figure that out. And so really making it clear how everyone can do it, or as many people as possible. Because if you're privileged enough to stand at the front of the room, or to write a book, or to be sharing knowledge and information with people, then this is a great opportunity for you to help people who have less privilege than you by making sure it's accessible as much as you can. Yeah. And another thing that I wanted to share with you is it can be helpful, and now this is a little bold, and not everyone's going to want to do this or feel comfortable doing it, but it can be bold to acknowledge your privilege, or at the very least acknowledge the circumstances from which you're sharing this information. Because that can give people the ability to discern if it doesn't relate to them and go, oh, I know why this doesn't relate to me. Because I don't share this particular experience or background or whatever the thing is. But to be really upfront about that's what it is. Like that, it's just like if a scientist put out a study, they will tell you like the parameters of the study. Like, here's what we included, here's what we excluded, here's how we came up with this data. So that when you're looking at that information, you can understand, oh, okay, here's where that might not apply because they didn't look at this. Does that make sense? Yeah, and a lot of people aren't going to want to do that because they're going to feel, it's going to feel really vulnerable to stand at the front of the room and say, yeah, here's my privilege, let me show you it. Right? They're not going to want to do that. But I think there's ways that you can do it, especially if you tell through storytelling and through vulnerability, and I think that really builds trust. Do you have a comment on that?
I do. I've been thinking about this.
Yeah, I love that perspective, and I agree, and that's something, particularly when I do coaching with people, that I'm talking about really like owning your worth and who you are and where you came from, and being comfortable owning all of it, the really awesome stuff as well as the less awesome stuff, because when you're just comfortable with it, when you're comfortable owning and claiming it, and you're not apologizing for who you are, when you can walk into a room and not apologize for who you are, like that's a powerful statement. And that's not always with words even, right? We apologize for who we are in a variety of ways, like body language is a huge one. Kind of do this. We pull away, we shrink in, something like that. Like all of that is examples of apologizing, and I don't think anyone should apologize for who you are. And I love the perspective that you brought up that if you grew up with privilege, you didn't choose that. It just came, it just happened, just like the people who didn't. Yeah, so thank you. Anything else on that? Any other thoughts? Burning?
I would just like to
to say that I think it sometimes gets lost on those of us who do experience a lot of privilege, that when we're asking people to acknowledge privilege, it's never, I'm not saying I want anybody to feel guilty for the privilege that they have. That's never, I've never heard any other person from any other, oppressed intersection say that you're white, therefore I want you to feel guilty about it. Or you grew up rich, so therefore I want you to feel guilty about that. Only that you acknowledge the way I got to where I am right now is going to look different than the way that you're gonna get there because of these inherent privileges that I have. Privilege does not have to equal guilt.
Yeah.
It just is acknowledgement.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Have you guys seen that Upworthy video about privilege where they line up a bunch of students and they're like on a race, and first they say, okay, everyone whose parents are still married, take a step forward. And then some of the kids take a step forward. Everyone, and they start saying all of these different circumstances that improve those kids' ability to succeed. And by the end, there's only a handful of kids at the very front, and they're pretty far ahead of the kids at the back, and then they start the race. And some of the kids at the back actually get pretty close to finishing, but clearly the ones who have more opportunity, that have stepped forward, are the ones that finish first. And so it's just it's the awareness. It's not about shame or guilt, it's awareness. And I just want to sit up here and say, I'm certainly not an expert. I have a limited experience of certain circumstances that I'm happy to share and that I want to share to start this conversation, but I don't know everything about this topic. And I'm not necessarily right. I mean, most of the time I find out I'm only right about 90% of the time, and the other 10% of the time I'm totally wrong. Just gonna own that. 10% of the time, wrong. 90% of the time, right. So even in the context of this conversation, I encourage you to think for yourself and ask, how does this apply to me, and how does this apply to the people that I work with? And feel free to disagree with me. I'm 100% okay with that. I just love that we're having this conversation at all, because I think that's how we create social change, is by starting with these conversations. And the last point I wanted to share with you how I think that we can really change the dynamic of privilege and really allowing our knowledge and information to reach a greater audience is to allow for people to have an experience different than ours. Just like I've done. To ask people questions and say things like, do you agree, is that what you've experienced as well? Because when you can open that door, that you're not the expert standing at the front of the room telling you what you don't know, especially as it relates to your very own situation, guess what? You know better than I do about your situation. Most of the time. I mean, I'm a coach. Sometimes I know better than people, right? Like very, very occasionally. But generally speaking, right? And so just opening that door and acknowledging and saying, what is this like for you? And how do you want to use this? Because it's such a simple and easy way to give people the opportunity, unlike the students in the study who are told life is fair and you have the same opportunities as everyone else, and then they're not achieving the same results and they're thinking something is wrong with me. But simply by asking that question, sometimes it just opens that door for someone to make that acknowledgement for themselves. Oh, it isn't that way for me. Actually, it's different. And that can be a great starting point to have a conversation with someone who has a different background than you. Because then you can say, well, what is it like for you? I want to know. And you're sitting in this room because you do want to know. Yeah. And so I'm going to wrap this up today before we get to our Q&A by asking you, what is your experience? What do you disagree with what I've said? Let's have a little open sharing conversation. Let's break this down even more, because I'm not the expert. Collectively, we're all co-creating the experience that we want to have, and it's not about me standing up here and telling you stuff you don't know. It's about me starting a conversation and all of our voices joining in together. I'm curious how this could work out. I'm curious what this means. Like I remind myself all the time that I don't necessarily know what things mean, even as knowledgeable as I am. Even our own perspective and experiences aren't always that reliable. Have you ever completely changed your perspective on something?
Every day.
Yeah, right? Like of like your own life or whatever. It's so much of it is where you're coming from right now, what resources you have to work with right now. You know, what's your mindset and emotional state today? I mean, I like to say to clients, remind them of 2 things. Number 1, don't believe everything you think. And feelings are information, they're not facts. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't make it true. I mean, you might be feeling that, but if you're scared, let's say, you're going to your car at night and you feel scared, that doesn't necessarily mean you are actually in danger.
Jamal, can you come to the first floor? Jamal?
We're coming, thanks. So even within the context of this conversation, I encourage you to challenge your own perspective, even as you're sharing it with people, and be like, where am I coming from today, and how might it be different, and how can I approach this differently? So I think that's all the time we have for today, so I'll turn it back over. Thanks.